Hello. Um, this is a new channel I'm making. If you know me, my other channel is Canon. It's more centered around religious stuff. But I wanted to start a second one because I often have these big analysis and ideas in my head that I want to kind of get out there, but I really have like a platform to do it. I don't feel right putting it on my religious stuff because it's more centered around ideas and scholastic theology. So I'm kind of making a new channel, and it's gonna be centered around stuff like this. So first thing I want to do, and I kind of had this impulse from talking with a friend on Twitter, was to make a sort of analysis on Flowers of Evil because I read this about 2 weeks ago, and I looked at what people were saying about it, and it seems like they kind of glossed over, or a lot of the French literature and philosophy was kind of over their heads in a way, and that's not like the fault of them, but that's when you go into like a manga, you don't expect like a full background on like French philosophy or anything. So um, yeah, I wanted to make an analysis because I thought this was an amazing book. I loved it. I absolutely fell in love with it. I came across Flowers of Evil the first time. I was looking for art on Pinterest, and I found the main one. I mean, one of the duo protagonists, Dawa. So I came across Flowers of Evil looking for art on Pinterest, and I came across the secondary protagonist is Sawa. Her name is, and I found her, and I was like, oh, that's a cute girl. So I read parts of it when I was like 17 in high school, but I never finished it. I only got like 10 chapters in. I was a big fan of Baudelaire and other French existentialists. When during that age, I read Lacan's Écrité. I read The Stranger from Camus. I tried to read Being and Nothingness, and I got some stuff out of it, but I don't think I ever finished it. From Jean-Paul Sartre. Um, so yeah, I was semi-familiar with the ideas presented, um, but I never really realized reading it that that's what it was about. I just thought it was kind of a coincidence that this romance manga was titled that. So I preferred to just read Fleur de Mal from Baudelaire instead, and I rediscovered it again when I'm 24. Uh, and it was actually from Pinterest itself. I found the same picture. I was like, oh my gosh, this brings me back to when I was from high school. So I looked up the source. I found Flowers of Evil again, and I read it all in a night. And I literally uh, was crying for like 2 days straight after I finished it because I liked it so much. It was very profound, affected me very deeply, and I think on a more nostalgic level, brought me back uh, to that time in high school when I was before I converted, and I was kind of like this more nihilistic, pseudo Marxist, and very much saw myself in someone like Sawa. Uh, so yeah, like I said, it mentions a lot of French literature. I think it even also mentions Bataille, which could be a reference to some of the more um, erotic themes in there. That could also be a reference to what happens at the summer festival scene. But I never read him, so I can't really say as a absolute. But it's cut into two halves, which surround the experiences that the character is going through. The story kind of transitions between a more stark, like existential, nihilistic struggle between society and what you conform to and what society holds as like holy cows to them, and the other is more reconciling oneself to it, and it finally accumulates to the end where each person is sort of resurrected from their own spiritual deaths, so to speak. Um, so there will be spoilers. I do highly recommend that you read this before watching, of course, but um, that's entirely up to you. This, like I said, this manga is amazing. I loved it. So the story starts with this guy named Kasuga. He's very shy. He's very invested in books, and he carries Le Fleur de Mal everywhere he goes. He even has like a social relationship with Baudelaire, which is there's kind of a funny scene where he has the picture of Baudelaire um, on his mantle, like an idol, and he like asks him for advice, and he's like, "Oh, Baudelaire, what should I do?" Stuff like that. So he's very invested in French poetry and poetry in general. He has two loving parents who like eat at dinner tables together. Um, he assumingly has good grades, but overall he's kind of like a social outcast. Like he doesn't talk to anyone. He has his own social clique of friends, but they're all kind of losers. And overall, he's just kind of like a someone that you would look over in class, I guess. And Kasuga has a crush on a girl named Saiki, and she's very popular. She has great grades. She's generally just like this perfect, preppy, you know, high school girl, and he's very attracted to her. And he writes poetry to her. He writes. He sees her as her muse, her Beatrice, so to speak. He's deeply invested in trying to court her. And one day she leaves her gym clothes in the school. She leaves school after class, and this exposes a very deep, instinctive character in Kasuga. You see throughout the series of his impulse, and almost every critical decision you see throughout the whole story is arbitrated by his impulsivity, and this is really important later on. But Kasuga grabs her gym clothes and, in an act of complete like erotic vice, he inhales them, uh, and he hears the school door shut, which reveals that he probably got caught. So he stashes the gym clothes in his bag, and Kasuga rides his bike, and he sees a red-headed girl on the side of the road named Sawa. Um, and it establishes earlier that Sawa is a social recluse, and she's incredibly rude. She doesn't respect or acknowledge any authority of the teachers. She calls people bad slurs that I can't repeat, but um, one of her famous phrases is that she believes that people are like a sea of crap bugs, and she has a very she refers to people as like bugs and maggots. So it's like a very misanthropic view of humanity. So, anyways, Sawa climbs on his bike and asks to take for him to take a ride with her, and that's where she reveals that she was the one that saw him do these act of perversion, and it was she wants to make a contract with him to be his girlfriend in order that she doesn't go and tell Psyche. So he agrees out of fear, and he was way too cowardly to stand up for himself. And it's revealed later also that Sawa is quote unquote also a pervert. So um, that's why Sawa initially was attracted to Kasuga. Not attracted in a romantic sense. So Sawa's character is very basely given at the beginning, and this is intentional because later it's fledged out through the story progresses. Um, she's never really fully laid out, and her motivations are pretty ambiguous, and her personality in of itself is incredibly flat, like stoic and incredibly cold. Um, and she only really smiles when Kasuga is easing her boredom, either at his expense or at the expense of others. Um, and the smile is very warm. It's pretty funny when it happens because she looks like just like a delighted uh, schoolgirl when it happens. It's a very warm, loving smile. Um, and she's completely delighted in these like incredibly immoral acts. And later, it's also revealed that this is because she acts the way she does because she loathes the corruptibility of the human condition. She's continually tortured by boredom, by the social standards that's being imposed on her, and even her own sexuality, uh, which she tries to refuse to take part in the whole series because she wants to maintain this principle of misanthropy, and she does this because she views the whole human race to be sort of this race of hypocrites, and that they only care about sex and lying to each other. So immediately when I heard this idea of like a romantic contract, I thought about Sartre, because Sartre had this development in French thought called contingent love, and he developed this after finally getting a woman. He was continuously rejected because he was just not a sociable person whatsoever. Um, and I don't even know how he got a marriage to be in the first place because he was. Anyways, he went into an open marriage after renouncing his traditional social scheme of Roman Catholicism, and Sartre was playing off of Deleuze when he presents his idea that a relationship needs to be a sadomasochistic paradigm, because the conscience, which is something he labels as for itself, is to be reduced to nothing if it's an object, or an object in this case would be a person, if it's a person drowned in other subjectivity. So this is exactly what happens to Sawa and Kasuga. Sawa is the sadist in the relationship, and Kasuga is the masochist. And this is where both characters kind of find their pleasure and power for both parties in their respective romance. Um, so Kasuga and Sawa's relationship is very unique in of itself because there is no much of any real romance involved, uh, much at all until very later. There's like zero intimacy. Um, Kasuga is more like this humiliated, whipped slave boy, and this would later, become something more profound, and it develops into something that would help them develop each other um, through this sadomasochistic relationship. But um, you can see this in Kasuga, where one possible strategy is to gather and intensify every feeling and to posture it, uh, which the self appears as an object to be rejected and humiliated. And this is a way for itself, for the conscience, it strives toward a point of view where there is only one subjectivity in the relationship. So that would be both of the abuser and the abused working off of each other. So Sartre held sadism to be the effort to annihilate the subjectivity of the victim. So that would mean that the sadist, who is exhilarated in distressing the victim, which would be Kasuga, uh, Sawa would also seek to assume a subjectivity, which would take the point of view of the victim, um, and of itself, and as both subject and object. So really, um, it's kind of implied that Sawa is being the sadist in the relationship, but it's also sort of a self-reciprocating um, uh, methodology. And this makes sense later uh, once Sawa kind of reveals what she's thinking inside more. Uh, so, anyways, this was all a way for Eric Sartre to sort of counter Deleuze and what he regarded as an essential error of desire as to lack. And in French philosophy, it deals a lot with Platonization, dealing with negatives, um, and that's essentially what existentialism is. Once it gets to France, developing this point is that a firm negation of almost everything. So Kasuga's goal is to transcend this by his own use of morality. Um, and he would find that this betrays himself because he wants to better understand Sawa. And Sawa would later realize, or maybe perhaps she already realized early on, that this was just a front because she really did, I believe, have feelings for Kasuga. But again, she's sort of trapped in this base and a moral desire that she needs to um, express herself in. And Sawa is suffering from that. So, anyways, continuing with the story, Sawa organizes a date with Saiki, and he tells Kasuga to wear her clothes, under his uniform as she follows him on the date. Kasuga goes into a bookstore with her, and she shows Saiki Fleur de Mal. He's very passionate about it. He tells her all about French literature and stuff, and she uh, gets the book as a gift from him, and this makes Sawa very bored. Uh, Later, Kasuga is on a park bench with her, and he's racked with guilt about wearing her clothes under the his uniform on the date. And uh, in order to avoid this kind of nagging feeling that he needs an erotic relationship with Saiki, he blurts out if they can go out platonically, which was incredibly funny. I burst out laughing when he said that. But this is actually warmly accepted by Saiki, uh, and this surprises both Kasuga and Sawa, and eventually Sawa is once again bored with this development. So Kasuga later meets with Sawa in class, and um, Sawa tells her that he needs to write on the chalkboard so that when people go into the class the next day, that he stole the clothes, uh, because he still had the clothes in his bag, and he was supposed to write that he stole the clothes, and he was going to leave it on the class for her to see, and Kasuga refuses to do this, and he stands up for himself in a moment of independence, and Sawa says she's about to end the contract with him, but it's suddenly inside Kasuga he feels this sort of release from his inner spirit, motivated by guilt and shame. This manga also deals heavily, I think, with more Dostoevskian themes like fear and loathing. But he in an act of pure impulse, he writes down that he did it, and Sawa this pleases Sawa, and Sawa demands him to go further, and it kind of devolves into this ecstasy of him throwing paint around and trash around, and he completely destroys this entire classroom. And I think this is sort of where the Bataille influence comes in as well, or Bataille, I think his name is, yeah, Bataille. I think this is where the influence comes in because it's like it sort of looks like this almost like orgy of pleasure and destruction. And this happens a few times throughout the manga. So they destroy the entire classroom, and this is where Kasuga's he kind of enkindles this bond with Sawa, understanding in a way what she does, and he sort of takes it upon himself that he wants to uh, be the one that doesn't make her bored anymore. He wants to be the one that amuses her. Um, so in a way, Kasuga is still finding pleasure with Sawa's commands. And oh, I didn't mention this before, but she mentioned when they first met that Sawa desires to peel back Kasuga's skin, peel off different layers of it. And while initially this seems like the kind of weird sadosexual thing, it actually reveals itself to ultimately be that it's peeling away of what Kasuga is more of the inside. Because Sawa says that they're both perverts, and in my opinion, a pervert in this name is just a name for being evil or immoral. Perversion, in its definition, is just a distortion or like a corruption, and especially involves like sexuality. But but this is where Flowers of Evil comes in because Baudelaire's theme in Flowers of Evil is to accept the evil that you are. That's what this whole first half is kind of a culminating to. So at this point with the story, he decides to break up with Saiki out of guilt. Saiki actually refuses and says that she genuinely likes Kasuga. And this again surprises Sawa, but she has, I know, a general indifference to everything, and she's generally dissatisfied. She tells him that she wants to understand Kasuga more because of his passion and his interest in stuff like French poetry and philosophy. And she shows him Fleur de Mal, which she kept as a gift from him. Also, I'm not sure if it's revealed in this scene, but she later confesses that she resents being a top student because she feels that she has no agency in her life. She's had her entire life being dictated by parents and different authorities, and it's a funny dynamic because Psyche absolutely like refuses to break up with this unpopular pervert, and she's like madly in love with him for like no apparent reason, uh, with his own personality, and Sawa's interference making it almost impossible to like actually make this a real life situation. Just a little bit. This is like not possible whatsoever. Um, it almost like betrays itself constantly, and this is very intentional. It's not just a a fictional romance novel trope. Reading through this, you realize throughout that the main character is the way he looks at the world is because it's an imposition of false values that are not natural to him. It's like a total scheme that he's adopted out of despair. Uh, he doesn't do anything with conviction. He doesn't believe anything besides like adoring his favorite poets. There's a scene very later on where he's confronting his father. Kasuga's confronting his father, and it reveals that he was actually given Fleur de Mal to him, and he's implying that this entire philosophy is imposed by him. And this was spurred on by Sawa ripping his book in pieces because she believed that it had done nothing in her life. So there's a relation between Saiki and Kausuga, um, where Kausuga is what he fears in becoming in Saiki. This sort of imposition where everything's decided for himself and he has no agency. So Sawa rips up his book, and in a way, Sawa is the actual living book of this whole series. Uh, she represents all of the ideals that Kasuga desires. And in the second part, he actually says that all the literature he's been reading was vanity. It was all in vain. It meant nothing because he was never applying it to himself or his personality. So continually peeling off Kasuga's skin uh, made him cycle into a new birth. He completely is negating his ego into a pure state of destruction. And essentially, by the time he meets Sawa, he's essentially like a baby. He's just an infant. Uh, anxiety, anxiety in the manga is a huge theme, and this is where Kierkegaard gets into play. But both characters play in this existentialist scheme, and although it's in very different ways, not only in the more Sartrean relationship, but more how they interact with each other in a more like Camus-esque absurdist world, um, and how they sort of reconcile themselves into conquering nihilism. So, uh, explaining what I mean by that is that Kierkegaard has this view of anxiety that's it's an entire like ontological essentiality to human agency and being of itself. Um, it takes a negative position in metaphysics where anxiety is this kind of repulsion to nihilism. And it takes birth at our emergence of self conscience. So despair is kind of like the second stage of this. And it's the complete negation of hope. That's what despair is. And both anxiety and despair is not how we kind of think of it as a more enthusiastic phenomena, but it's more of like a metaphysical imperative that's imposed. So anxiety and despair both coalesce in each other, and they kind of right the wrongs of human freedom. Both are necessary for overcoming the stark nihilism of reality. Um, but anxiety plays a role in overcoming despair. And this is laid out in on anxiety. You can read it for yourself if you want. Um, but despair is the state that both characters, Sawa and Kausiga, falls in. Although Sawa is attempting to use Kausiga as a sort of uh, project to make her relate to herself, because she in herself is suffering from complete loneliness. Um, Sawa is in this very deep, blank nothingness on her own little island of her own intellect, and she's being presented with this despair. And the way that she answers back the long, echoing hallway is with her own pessimistic indifferency. Um, and so she celebrates herself more in this Dionysian way of engaging in the chaos of her own vices and her own human nature, but also lamenting the condition of her sexuality, her base desires. And of course, at the end of this teleological existence, uh, this has to end up and culminate in her own self destruction. Um, so, this is where I can finally talk about boredom, because I've been mentioning tons of times that Sawa is completely bored with life. Um, and this has more significant meaning in French philosophy than you might think. Uh, Kierkegaard lays out that boredom is a Kierkegaard, of course, is not French, but he was the founder of the existentialist like thought. So um, the French really took the ball and rolled with it, but he kind of began this line of thinking. But anyways, Kierkegaard lays out that boredom is like the absolute worst state of man. He even claims that it's the root of all evil, way past despair. It's the complete negation of negations. It's like the total nothingness that is reality. And I heard in a speech, I don't remember what book it was from. I think it's on boredom. Um, but I remember hearing a speech, and Kierkegaard pseudo blasphemously, or just it mostly blasphemous. I don't like Kierkegaard, by the way. Uh, I identify as an Orthodox Christian, not Eastern Orthodox, but in praxis, I follow Catholic doctrine, and I don't subscribe to Kierkegaard's heterodoxy. But he blasphemously claims that God created Adam and like the stars, the luminaries, the sun and the moon, his kingdom, the whole course of human events, creation, new creation, soteriology, all of all of reality, because God feared boredom. He could not stand the throes of boredom in itself. Uh, so for Kierkegaard, this is the problem of our reality. This is evil in of itself. Um, so this has themes in Fleur de Mal as well. I won't explain everything, but if you read it alongside with Flowers of Evil, which I did after I read the manga, it was very eye opening. There's a lot more themes presented because like I said earlier, that Sawa is the very living version of this book. So I wasn't consciously making comparisons in my head because I read this in high school, but one of the poems that Baudelaire wrote was called Spleen, and it's divided into various parts. And I have a few excerpts here I'll read. So he writes, when the skies are low and heavy as a lid, over their mind tormented by disgust, and hidden in the gloom the sun pours down on us a daylight dingier than any dark, when the earth becomes a trickling dungeon, where trust, like a bat, is lunging throughout the air, beating its tentative wings along the walls, and bumping its head against the rotting beams, when the rain falls straight from the unrelenting clouds, forging the bars of some enormous jail, and the silent hordes of obscene spiders spin their webs across the basements of our brains, then all at once the raging bells break loose, and hurling to heaven their awful caterwaul, like homeless ghosts with no one left to haunt, whimpering in their endless grievances, and giant hearses without dirge or drums parade at the half-step of my soul, where hope, defeated, weeps, and the oppressor dread plants his black flag on my ascending skull. And here's one called The King. I'm like a king of a rainy country, rich but helpless, decrepit, though still a young man, who scorns his fawning tutors, and wastes his time on dogs and other animals, and has no fun. Nothing distracts him, neither hawk nor hound, nor subjects starving in the palace gate. His favorite fool's obscenities falls flat. The royal invalid is not amused. The ladies waiting for a princely nod no longer dress indecently enough to win a smile over this young skeleton. So these very deep and misanthropic musings are all about boredom. And it might seem really exaggerated or ridiculous, and I certainly think so because I said myself I'm a Christian, and I obviously believe that the existentialist philosophy is incompatible with any religion of itself. But this is a very scary idea for the cynic. If one is living for no other purpose other than to do the motions, uh, if you believe in self-contradicting people and hypocrites who don't stand up or live for their own ideals, and if you live only by base desires of sex and drawing pleasure from droll habits and interests, boredom is a metaphysical ill that would permeate through all of existence, and it would reveal itself to unveil the full curtain and show oneself the gaping maw of reality. For Sawa, this is something she can't overcome. She's a character who suffers the heaviest because she herself is not willing to conform to normalcy. That's what they call it in the manga. They call it being normal, or being in with normal people. Um, but in Kasuga, whether this is an unconscious realization or not, or rather, if it was merely masochistic, almost sort of Stockholm syndrome response to Sawa's abuse. He desires earnestly and impulsively to make Sawa amused. Um, so Kasuga, to use another Kierkegaardian term, is utilizing his leap of faith, or he's trusting something without sound reasoning or deductive or inductive logic. And this is way too long to explain. If you want to dive into that thought, um, read Fear and Trembling by Soren Kierkegaard. Um, but he's using this leap of faith to try to help his girlfriend, who he's coerced, but he's willing to support her. So, anyways, going back to the story, um, Saiki is the she's the complete antithesis to everything that they are. Saiki has despair, um, but she is trying to desperately conform to Kausuga and his exotic philosophy, because she doesn't have any agency of her own. She's going back to a false perception of the world and human beings, by trying to conform. And in the end, Kausuga totally rejects her advances, um, and she even tries to have sex with Kausuga in an act of pure desperation, because she likes him so much, and she wants to almost become him. Sawa is also disgusted by her lack of conviction, and she totally sees any potential or willingness to sort of cross over like she did. Um, so back to the story. Uh, Kausuga eventually goes over to Sawa's house to return some homework, and he meets her dad, who's actually like completely normal, a moral person. Speaks very warmingly to Sawa, and just, oh, she comes home and she swears at me a lot, but we respect her, and stuff like that. Completely spineless father. Um, and he returns the homework on her desk, and he reads her diary, which was, on her desk, and it says on it that she wants to reach the other side. And so eventually Sawa comes in her room. She has a giant sign on it, by the way, that says "Do not enter," and she remains pretty indifferent with Kausuga being in her room, but she absolutely frenzies when her dad enters. So it's kind of establishing that she has some kind of trust with Kausuga. It's not merely this outward abuse and sadistic pleasure that she's getting out. So Kausuga eventually asks what her desires were for to see the other side, and she says that she wants to see the other side of the small town that she lives in. She points to some mountains on the other side. She says she wants to see the other side of the mountains. She was like, okay. Since Kausuga is trying to please Sawa, he takes her on her bike, but he fails. Eventually, being confronted by Saiki, he doesn't pass. He gets on the road and he like escapes at night, away from his parents, and this causes her to call the cops and find a search party for him. And he gets confronted by Saiki, where they're kind of on an overpass. Saiki is being confronted because she doesn't understand why Kausuga just doesn't live a normal life with her, because she's literally the perfect girl, as we established, but Kausuga can't really articulate why. Uh, and this is where Sawa eventually rips Fleur de Mal apart, which was kind of Saiki's prized possession now, as well as him. Um, and they both go back because his mom eventually encounters them after a search party is found. Sawa's upset and dissatisfied. Um, she never gets there, but of course, Saiki forgives Kausuga because of her intense love for him. Later, to make up for this, Kausuga builds a tent where he was meeting Sawa, at a river, and he steals all of the girls' gym clothes. This is where he completely just kind of becomes a base, immoral person, fully engaging with his evil. Um, so he steals all the gym clothes and he steals panties, and he strings it across this tent with clothesliners, and this greatly pleases Sawa. And this is where there's sort of a weird eroticism that she attaches to Kasuga. Um, she's very happy. She's visibly blushed uh, when she sees these acts of morality. She starts sweating. She starts speaking to Kasuga very more respectively. Like she's an actual confidant. Because I think she believes that Kasuga is understanding her more, or that they're becoming more of the same person. And of course, this is Kasuga's goal, and this pleases him as well. And this is unveiling more that Sawa actually likes Kasuga, at least in my opinion. And Kasuga eventually makes more and more heinous crimes, vandalism, all in an effort to make her happy. And he plans for a big act where he wants to strewn all of the gym clothes and panties over during the summer festival, which was coming up. And so Saiki notices that Kasuga is going out too much, and she never sees him, and she's really suspecting that he likes Sawa, because obviously they're always together. And she goes over to the tent in an act of desperation, uh, and tries to have sex with him. Kasuga rejects her, like we said. He actually says that he is in love with Sawa. Whether this is true or not, we don't really know Kasuga's real intentions with that. But Saiki forces himself on him, rapes Kasuga. Eventually, he pushes her off, and in an act of jealousy, Saiki burns down the tent and tells Sawa that who comes to the tent and finds it burnt down, says that Kasuga had sex with her, and that he accepted her advances, and this was just like completely met with Sawa's indifference, of course, uh, and this completely breaks down Saiki. And this is like the moment where she finally gives Kasuga up. Um, so like her final act of pure despair uh, is Saiki bending her appearance to look more like Sawa instead of trying to conform to Kasuga more. Um, and when the summer festival eventually happens, her transformation looks like an exact carbon copy of her to try to get some semblance of personality or agency in her life. So after the fire, Saiki turns herself in, and because it was being suspected that Kasuga lit it, which was like her kind of final act of being nice to Kasuga. And she did let the entire school know, though, that he stole the gym clothes and panties, which was not revealed at that point. So Sawa and Kasuga go into the dilapidated house, and they begin to fight, which is this sort of loving gesture that they do to each other. It's kind of like this playful roughhousing that they do. And Sawa, for the first time, is broken down into tears. And while she's on top of Kasuga, she says that she realizes that the other side of is not this actual other side of the small town, but it's actually her own self destruction. And Sawa and Kasuga embrace each other. And but by the way, this is not romantic at all. This is more of a platonic thing, because I think Kasuga, out of his own guilt, developing this sort of erotic fascination with Saiki, does not want to engage in the same eroticism after developing a relationship with Sawa. And Sawa hates her own sexuality, of course, because that's how she has her misanthropic principles in her life. So they embrace each other, and they both plan to light themselves on fire and to kill themselves at the festival to make a public display of their suicide. So they go to the festival, and they're disguised, and they go and they douse each other with kerosene, and um, they go on top of this big parade landing. They declare their own misanthropy to the world. They say that everyone's shit bugs, and they light a torch. Sorry, they light a match, and um, this is where Kausiga sees the evil flower, which is kind of presented in art for the manga, but he kind of hallucinates this giant evil flower, and it's just a giant black flower with an eye, and it's sort of the pupils are kind of rolling over. Uh, but the twist is that Sawa pushes him off, so that Kausiga would not die. So Kausiga is obtained by police, and Sawa, before she could light herself on fire, is also subdued by police, and she's screaming, suffering during this. So Kausiga moves, and he never sees Sawa ever again. So this begins part two, and part two is kind of the more redemptive part in Kausiga's story. Um, Kausiga, after this event, is at a crossroads because he does not know. I think it's about maybe it's either 4 or 7 years, but it's quite a long time. It's like enough time that is pretending to be normal, but he can never really forget what ever happened with his experience with Sawa. So he's kind of having this pervading emptiness within himself because everything that developed. And so he meets this girl at a bookstore, I think, and she's reading Fleur de Mal, which prompts Kausiga to kind of freak out and ask how he knows this book. And she's kind of taken aback, but she says she likes literature. And the girl gives him the book. Her name's Aya. And eventually they start a nice friendship with each other. She looks exactly like Sawa. She has red hair. She doesn't have any glasses, but she her facial features look very similar like her, which is why he was so taken aback by her reading that book, which he entirely forgot and cast it off. He didn't want to even think of it. So he's enveloped in this much more organic relationship with a girl. Um, she's really big into literature, but Kausiga is still suffering like Sawa is at this point. But he eventually discovers that she's working on a novel, and he's bring to tears because he's reading the manuscript and you realize he can identify with the protagonist. So it's very profound because he's sort of coming back into his old personality. So Kausiga is seeing Aya as this kind of grace in his life to be himself, but because of Sawa, he chooses to sort of live in his own base natural depravity. So he's constantly at a cusp between these two paradigms, and eventually, in a very romantic scene, he uses another impulsive decision to ask Aya, who already had a boyfriend, to be his boyfriend so that he could save her. Because Aya wants to publish a book, but she's always too nervous to do so, and no one really understands that she's a literature head. And so Aya, who shares the same impulse of Kausiga, also says yes, and they have a very romantic and loving relationship. It's almost the stark opposite of what he had with Sawa. So he continues this relationship with Aya, but eventually Kausiga has to visit his hometown for his dying grandfather, and he meets one of Saiki's friends, and she actually tells Kausiga where Sawa moved to, and he's surprised because he wasn't sure if she was dead or alive, if she even lived anywhere near her. So she says that she lives in Chiba, and she moved with her mom, and she doesn't live with her dad anymore, and she works at a ramen shop. So Aya finishes her novel, but Kausiga says that because of his past, he needs to meet Sawa again before he can actually read the novel, because he identifies with the main protagonist, so he can't possibly um, experience this with his girlfriend unless he works through this. Um, so he tells her everything about what happened with the summer festival, and Aya is now completely motivated to go with him and support him. So they take the train to Shiba, and they find her at the ramen shop, and they go and they order ramen. Uh, the mother recognizes Kausiga and kind of, lovingly warns Kausiga that she's very peaceful now, and she's like, she's a way different person. She acts completely differently, and that she's kindly asking Kausiga not to erupt at anything because that would. But Aya's insisting that they have to speak with her because Kausiga needs this catharsis, and so she eventually comes out. She looks completely changed. Her hair is long. It's black. It's no longer red. She doesn't wear glasses anymore. The only thing that really remains is her kind of stoic and very stark, cold personality. Um, so eventually they agreed to talk somewhere else. That's not the ramen shop, and um, they go to the beach. And this is my favorite scene, and probably one of my favorite uh, endings to a manga I've ever read. But this is where Sawa says that she's glad actually that Kausiga was able to stay normal and find a girlfriend that was something completely different from Sawa. And Kausiga asks Sawa how she was while living with her mom. She answers with very ambiguous and distant answers. And finally, Kausiga just asks why he was pushed off at the festival. She's holding out her hand, and Kausiga attempts to touch her hand before she pulls back, and she says, "I don't remember. It doesn't matter." And that's obviously symbolic because Kausiga this entire time was just trying to connect with Sawa, who seems like a person that's unable to connect with anything. And finally, he asks if she's been liberated um, from conforming from this normalcy. And whether this actually happened, I don't actually know. But her response is her eyes rolling back, which is exactly what he saw at the festival with the flower of evil. Her eyes turning back. So that's just an allegory or symbolism that she actually is the flower of evil. She's what Baudelaire represents, and this is why she turns back and says goodbye. And this envelops a passion in Kausiga, and he throws her on the sand, and he pushes her, and starts crying in tears, and he declares while she's on the ground that he's very glad that she's still around and not dead, no matter what happened. And Sawa pushes him back, and they start fighting. And Aya and Kausiga and Sawa all join in just pure joy, uh, sort of roughhousing. And it's a very, very cool scene. So they lie all down at the beach, and Sawa says not to come back, and she wants to um, let Kausiga live his life with Sawa, or with Aya for the rest of her life. And so Kausiga grows up and marries Aya. They have a life that's happily ever after. Kausiga repicks up Fleur de Mal, and he reads it an entirely new perspective. He's happy. He begins to write a book, which is, I assume, everything that happened, his life story, his biography. And finally, capping it all off, the last panel in the manga, it's kind of the key that reveals everything. And it's depicting Sawa's perspective of her first meeting with Kausiga. and it's entirely through her eyes. And she sees everyone and everything around her as like very monochrome, deformed. It almost looks like Junji Ito, the way that she sees other people. There's flies and bugs coming out of people. They're more of like these hulking masses of like specks that look like silhouettes. And these all obviously symbolize her distaste for society. And she's under the teacher's desks, and she's seeing sort of this monochrome almost envelop her. And she sees Kasuga steal the gym suit, and this is the only portion in her perspective where she sees an actual human being. She sees the sniffing of the gym suit with his facial features in his nose. So it was clear. And later on, at the a curbside, and she's looking at the other side of the town, and she's having this normalcy envelop her again. She's turning monochrome, and in her head, she's screaming out for someone to kill her. And in a very beautiful panel, there's a splash of deep crimson red, and the world is clear now, um, but it's in deep crimson, and she sees Kausiga on the bike, and Sawa asks what Kausiga was doing, and that's how the manga ends. And I absolutely love that ending. It was, it probably, it still sticks with me. I still think about um, this ending in this manga, and I've read it like 3 weeks ago. So I believe that this story is a nihilistic view of like taking anarchy upon yourself and engaging in the destructions of what you view as dialectical contradictions in your life. But for Sawa, this was the exact teleology that would result in your own self destruction. And the second part is, and what it establishes, that these people need to be redeemed. There needs to be a kind of redemption to both of them. And Kausuga was saved when he met Aya. Kausuga was not saved when he met Sawa. In fact, he was more diverting into his base depravities. Um, well, this was only at the second part of the manga. In the last chapter, it's revealed that Sawa was actually saved by Kausuga. Although their redemptions were drastically different. The whole manga itself is very ambiguous to what like Sawa thinks in her head or even believes. And at the beach scene, I think it was very apparent, um, or if it was from the lack of time or not. I guess that's left to interpretation as well. But her motivations aren't exactly articulated to herself. She's merely this form of chaos, um, which is why she can identify with the pure uncontradiction of Kausiga's nature. Um, you know, like we said before, the entire reason that they relate to each other is that they both find each other to be perverts. Eventually, after she develops this kind of relationship with him and all the events transpire, she still realizes that Kausuga hadn't been saved yet, like how he did her. And there's no real introspective change in Kausuga. There's only an extrospective one, because Sawa has been molding and transforming Kausuga into her own little pet project. And at the point of the festival, this is finally where she realizes this, and she pushes him off that so she could die, knowing that she has been fulfilled in this redemption. But she was unfortunately stopped and subjected to the thing that she feared the most. So really, it is left to interpretation if Sawa, moving and becoming normal in a ramen shop where she's not causing any trouble, she doesn't at least outwardly hate humans anymore, and she's more friendly in a way. Is if that's a better for her or not? Rather, if she would have continued in how she was, in her own innate human desires and her own human nature. So in the manga, both Kausuga and Sawa are revealed in the fact that they're both trying to live as true as possible to themselves. And Kausuga, if you want to make a dualism, was in between Aya, which was the grace of redemption, and Sawa, which was kind of this full, unabashed vice of the human condition, and ultimately represented by the flower of evil and Baudelaire. And both Kausuga and Sawa realized, although at different points, that Kausuga, of course, needed the catharsis brought about by Aya meeting Sawa again. But they both realized that living in the absurdity of life is a better outcome than at least just base self-destruction. So that's kind of my whole analysis of this whole manga. It's a very beautiful romance, although not in the traditional sense whatsoever. And I very much liked it, and its themes with French philosophy and dealing with this more nihilistic and existential problems that I find that the Japanese cynicism delves in a lot. But mixes kind of the Japanese cynicism in with more Western existentialism. So yeah, that's it. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.